Good morning, everyone. Kia ora matua, kia ora, and tēnā koutou katoa. I'm Bruce Burns. I'm with the University of Auckland, here at the School of Biology and Sciences. I've been working on Kauri on and off for about 20 years now. I'll change my title slightly. You'll see I've put the kings and queens of the forest, because I realised when I looked at the title that actually Kauri are monoecious. That means they're both male and female. So they're not just kings, they're queens. I couldn't think of a royal title that took into account hermaphrodites, but anyway. So they are both monoecious. I love Kauri forest. There's a picture up in the Cascades area of the Waitakuris, and this is a type of forest that we're walking through with these enormous trees around us. I always feel like when you're walking through forest and you get into a patch of Kauri, you actually, things change. You actually feel, there's a lot of light in the forests. There's almost a smell, the smell of the resin, and it's a very peaceful place and a very inspiring place, and you feel the presence of these enormous trees around you. I think it's a very special place to be. So this is I thought I'd just throw in a few. There are conifers, of course. And these are some of the leaves of the conifers. We think of conifers as like pine trees with needle-like leaves. Of course, in the southern hemisphere, we have a number of species that have these very broad, flat leaves that almost resemble flowering plants. They produce these cones that are about the size of a tennis ball, and they take about 18 months to develop. This is a female cone here that produces a seed, and over here as well. But you'll see there are a couple of male cones here as well. And the single tree will have both male and female cones on it. That's why I talk about them being, having both sexes on the same tree. The current distribution of Kauri, obviously you'll all be familiar with the history of Kauri. Well, I think you are. That it once covered the majority of the North Island, or at least there were patches of it across the North Island. This is the remaining area of Kauri down to what we consider the Kauri line down here at about 38 degrees latitude. Very interesting line here. We're not entirely sure. I think the current theories are around that it's caused by frost affecting seedlings that stops it at that point. But there's a few questions about why is that the current boundary to Kauri, and is it actually moving further south? In terms of the overall area of Kauri, we're down to about 1 to 3% of the original extent of mature Kauri in New Zealand through our logging effects over the last 150 years. So there's not too much of the mature forest left. There is a resource of second growth Kauri also on top of that, sort of young ricus stands that have come up after that logging. But I wanted to talk this morning really just to ask the question, if Kauri is threatened by Phytophthora, taxon of Agathis, PTA, Dieback, well, what's so special about Kauri? I have the pleasure, I guess, of being positive, whereas I think a lot of the other speakers will have to be negative, talking about deaths by PTA, but I can talk about good things. What is so special about Kauri? Why are we so interested in it? What are we going to lose if we have a loss of Kauri? So I wanted to just briefly touch on a few of these things. It comes from a very ancient noble lineage. It has a whole lot of characteristics about Kauri that we don't find in any other species. It's, and I've tried to sum that up as being biologically extreme. So I'll talk about some of those characteristics. It's a foundation species. It provides, because it's so big and it has these impacts in the forest, it provides a framework that provides, as Amata was talking about, it provides the sort of the house within which all these other species can survive, and they wouldn't be there without the Kauri. It also is important economically, has been incredibly important economically in the past, and I think we still have a lot of potential in the future. I think some of the other speakers will talk more about that. And also, obviously, it has a place in our society as an icon, as we see it as something that represents the New Zealand, particularly in the north. That's why it was sent to San Francisco, I'm sure, because it represents New Zealand. There's something about it. It acts as a flagship species for us in society. So just going through those things, just in terms of its ancient lineage, it's part of the family Araucariaceae, which is a very ancient conifer lineage, conifer family that was originally global. So there are places you go. I went to Arizona. Went to this petrified forest, and when I looked at what they were actually old Araucariaceae stumps that had been around at the time of the dinosaurs, and had gone through a period of the process of petrification. So at one point, Araucariaceae, members that were all over the world, now they're only found in the southern hemisphere. So they're not in the northern hemisphere. Well, they do get a little bit over the equator, but mostly in the southern hemisphere. They include things like the monkey puzzle tree here in Chile. Also, this is Agathis robusta in Queensland and in Australia. And of course, the Wallemia nobilis is the most recently discovered genus within the Araucariaceae. This is a species that was found in some canyons just outside, in the Blue Mountains just outside Sydney, about 20 years ago now, I guess. They didn't recognize what it was, but then they found that there were fossils that looked exactly like it, and realized that this was what was the same species as the fossils. So it's been around for a long time. This is only represented by a couple of small stands in areas around Kauri. Let me just change this slightly. Yeah. Sorry. So it's represented by a couple of small stands in these canyons in the Blue Mountains. That's all that's around. This is in terms of Kauri, or in terms of the Kauris within the genus Agathis, and this is a map of where Agathis species occur within the world. And you'll see that here we are, this is Kauri down here in New Zealand. All the other species of Kauri, of Agathis, actually occur through into subtropical and tropical areas. Here's the equator running through here, and there are a whole bunch of Agathis species that occur through the Philippines, Malaysia, Papua New Guinea, Indonesia, that type of area, and New Caledonia. New Caledonia is quite a centre of diversity of Agathis, and I think it's quite interesting because some of what we see with Kauri, some of the characteristics are relative to that tropical origin, or for instance, when we try and grow Kauri seedlings, the maximum growth you get for Kauri seedlings is about 25 degrees Celsius. It seems to have a penchant for warm temperatures. So in terms of extreme, its characteristics, I mentioned it's biologically extreme. Why is it extreme? One of the things is it's extremely big. We know that. It's some of the individuals are counted amongst the third largest conifer in the world. The two other ones are the two sequoias in the west coast of North America. But other than that, the next largest conifers are those associated with those of Kauri. At the moment, the biggest one is Tani Mahuta, which is about 4.4 meters diameter. But there are much larger ones in the record, including one that's 6.4 meters. I thought I'd paste that out. So if you take this as one edge, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So from that stand to here, this is the size of the trunk of that large Kauri tree. It's enormous. Some of the early explorers, when they were walking through the forest, there's some really neat quotes that say, I was walking along through the forest and there was a cliff off to my right-hand side. And when he went to explore, that cliff was actually a large Kauri tree that he'd mistaken for a cliff in the forest. So enormous in terms of size, also in terms of age, of course. So there are estimates of ages in the thousands of years. In terms of that we have good evidence for through taking tree cores. We think that most of the Kauri have a typical life expectancy of around 600 years, but that the oldest established through taking tree rings is around 1700 years old. There may be older ones. This is a disc that's up at the Kauri Museum at Matakohi. You won't be able to read that, but this talks about 1100 as an estimate from counting the tree rings in this disc. So this particular tree was around 1,000 years old. So we're dealing with a tree that lives, has a lifespan well in excess of human lifespans. It looks, and so its whole biology is around those type of time spans. It's not within a human time span. It lives for ages. But it also has a whole lot of characteristics that we don't think about in terms of how it acts in the forest. And one of these is around its nitrogen cycling. And when people have looked at nitrogen in the Kauri ecosystem, they've found some very strange things. This is some of the work done by Warwick Sylvester from Waikato University. And when he looked at nitrogen what he first noticed, of course, was that Kauri builds up a huge accumulation of litter underneath mature Kauri stands. So these are depth isopleths around Kauri stands. Each of these circles is a Kauri tree. And you'll see that these are the depth of the litter, 30 centimeters, 40 centimeters, 60 centimeters. This is 1 meter. Close to the tree, it can be at least 1 meter in depth of litter, because the litter decomposes extremely slowly. It's called recalcitrant, and it also has, within that litter, it actually accumulates nitrogen, but it puts it into an immobile form. There are chemicals within the litter that bind up that nitrogen and stop it from being available to other plants. And so there's a great paradox within kauri forest, that you have huge amounts of nitrogen in the soil, but none of it is available to plants. And so most of the plants there have to experience an incredibly infertile type soil. And perhaps that's why kauri creates this type of environment with very low nitrogen levels. But if we look at what's called the nitrogen use efficiency of kauri, it's almost twice that of any other forest. So nitrogen use efficiency is how much carbon or how much production can a kauri tree gain from 1 unit of nitrogen. And if we measure that and compare it across the world, kauri is way in advance of a whole lot of other species. And so maybe this is a strategy of kauri. It creates a very nitrogen poor environment, but it can actually grow really well in those environments compared to all other species. So it's at an advantage. It also, when we look at kauri forest in total, it produces huge basal area. I'll explain what basal area is in a minute, but it's a measure of productivity, or how much biomass occurs within a certain unit of area of the forest. And in terms of basal area, it gets up to about 127 meters squared per hectare. Very tall, 30 to 50 meters, occasionally 60 meters. And with the amount of wood and also the carbon, the litter on the forest floor, there's an enormous amount of carbon stored in these ecosystems per unit of area. If we're looking for ways of storing carbon to try and take it out of the atmosphere, then kauri forest is, I think, very well worth looking at as a potential for storing carbon. I sort of mentioned basal area. So what we're talking about with basal area, so this is a standard trees, and if we measure the area, the cross-sectional area of the standard trees, so each of these circles, and then we sum that up over a unit of land area, we can get a measure of, that's why the meter squared of those cross-sectional areas of trees per unit area of land. And so if you have a lot of large trees on this unit of area of land, you'll get a high basal area. If you have a whole lot of small trees or very few trees, you get a small basal area. So it's a measure of the biomass of that forest. And when we compare, I've taken this global database of forests throughout the world. This is from 892 forests measured for basal area across the world. This line in the middle is the mean, and this represents the variation from all those forests. So majority of forests within the world have a basal area somewhere just under 40 meters squared per hectare. And then I looked at a database of 25 forest stands, mature kauri forest stands throughout its range. And this is the range here. So their average is up around the 80 to 90 meters squared per hectare. And there are only a very few stands from other forests throughout the world that actually get close to kauri. So for some reason, and this is something I'd like to look at, kauri is able to create forests with an enormous amount of basal area or biomass within their structure. Okay, so I mentioned this huge accumulation of litter. And it also has incredible effects on the soils. This litter has slow decomposition rates. It creates a deep organic layer, and any other species that's growing with kauri has to try and grow within that deep organic litter. And that litter has particular qualities. It tends to be acidic, very acidic. It tends to have low available nitrogen. I talked about that, and it is particularly drought prone. I had a student, Sarah Wise. Is Sarah here? Sarah just finished a PhD looking at the effects of those types of soil on associated species around kauri. So what she did, one of the experiments she did was she took simple transects that went, here's a large kauri in the background down here, and she took a transect that went out from the kauri, outside its canopy, outside its drip line, and then an equal distance into the surrounding forest that was a non-kauri. We did this on areas that were not where they were not on a ridge, or so we're trying to avoid the effect, the ridge effect, if you like. So this is all on flat land, moving from the kauri outside the drip zone into the surrounding forest. And we we sampled both the vegetation and the soils across that zone. This is some of the soil data, and what we've done here is we've compared that against remove, because we thought Well, we want to compare it against a large conifer, so to avoid the fact that we're simply measuring an effect of a large conifer, we wanted to see that Kauri was quite different from that. So here's the distance from the tree, from here, and these are very different variables. The blue line is the Kauri, and the green line is a remu. And in each case, the blue line is quite different from the green line. So we end up with the Kauri having much more acidic soil than the remu. In terms of total nitrogen, it has a high total nitrogen, as I've explained, although a lot of that's unavailable. It has a much higher organic carbon content, has a much higher carbon-nitrogen ratio, and it even has a different phosphorus ratio than the remu. So we're getting a very strange soil underneath these Kauri trees. When we look, this is a map. What we did with the vegetation data was we looked at these plots here are all the vegetation, represent the vegetation composition within the drip line. These are outside the drip line. And we put it through a statistical technique that looked at the similarity of vegetation either side of those 2 points. What we're showing here is that the composition of those plots inside the drip line, because these 2 polygons don't overlap, suggests they're completely different. We get a completely different group of species that occur with Kauri as opposed to outside Kauri. These are the remu, the same for remu, and these polygons do overlap considerably. So it's not occurring with remu. We get this completely different composition inside the drip line as opposed to outside. So Kauri is creating a community of species through the effects of its soil underneath its drip line. So this is a sort of a diagram of what we think. Here's a normal forest out here, and here is the Kauri forest, and this lens, this big grey lens, is this development of this large litter that's occurring underneath Kauri. And there are 3 types of species we identified that occur here. The red species are those that only occur under Kauri, or almost only occur under Kauri. There are the odd occurrence of it outside, but mostly these red species only occur under Kauri. The blue species actually occur outside Kauri, so the opposite. They can't tolerate the conditions created by Kauri, and so they occur outside that area. And then we do have some of these yellow species that actually occur throughout the Kauri forest. So they can both tolerate under Kauri and occur outside Kauri. So there are 3 types of species. And I want to, here's Sarah here, she's fine, so she's sitting in the bough of a Kauri tree up here. So I just wanted to look at some of these red species. And this is a group of these red species, if you like, the ones that occur with Kauri. And I was really encouraged that we had an evening at the museum, and there was a Maori speaker there who talked exactly about this. That Maori, this is not new knowledge for Maori. This is something they've known for a long time. That there are a group of species that associate only with Kauri. So here's a few of them. It's Tanikaha. This is a thing called Shizea dicotoma, a little fan fern. It's only about this big. I won't go through them all in detail because we don't have time. This one's really interesting down here at the very far corner. This is a greenwood orchid. This particular species is Australis Agathis, and this species only occurs under Kauri. Doesn't occur outside Kauri. We also have this thing here. This is now Ichthyostomum pygmaeum, little orchid, again on the bark of Kauri. Dracophyllum latifolium, I won't go on. But there's a large group of species that only occur under Kauri. And of course this has enormous implications in terms of what happens if Kauri is lost from the ecosystem. Because Kauri is creating that structure in the forest, we take Kauri away, we're not just getting rid of Kauri, we're actually getting rid of, or going to lose a large number of these other species that occur with Kauri. We looked, Sarah's also been looking at some of the mechanisms that could be driving this difference, the environment with and without Kauri. This is one thing, the simple thing she did was take some soil from beneath Kauri and then also soil from the broadleaf forest just outside the Kauri area, and she simply took them into the lab and left it to dry. And essentially what we're seeing here is the rate of water loss from that Kauri soil compared to the soil beneath that organic layer and then the broadleaf mineral soil. The main thing here is the red line is much higher than the other 2 lines, and what that's telling us is that Kauri soil, not only does it have a lot of chemical characteristics which are different, but it also dries at a much faster rate than the other soils in the forest. So one of the things that Kauri creates in that top layer around Kauri is a soil that's very susceptible to drought, or will dry out much faster than the other soils in the forest. So that's one of the ways that it creates a different environment. So all the species that occur with kauri have to have a much higher drought tolerance than those other species that occur outside kauri. So there are ways, there are mechanisms by which it creates this difference. I'll just, in the interest of time, I'll go through this quickly. The other thing about kauri forest, and it may be because of these, because in kauri forest you have these species associated with kauri, then outside kauri forest you have a whole range of species that are different from those. It means that overall a kauri forest, they have a very high species diversity. In fact, when we looked across, compared it to a whole range of other forests in New Zealand, they have number of species in these forests are much higher than other types of forests in New Zealand. So kauri has the highest number of plant species in all the forests of New Zealand. The other thing I should point out is not only does it create these environments, but as with a lot of species, there are a range of fungi and insects that actually you only find on kauri. This is one example. Eric Mackenzie's work looked at all the fungi that are associated with kauri. He works at Landcare Research in Auckland. And he looked at all these species of fungi that he found with kauri. There were a number that occurred with other species, but he found at least 12 species of fungi that you only ever found on kauri. This is one of them, Chilara agathis, which is a little rust that occurs on kauri leaves, and it only occurs there. So I just want to make the point, you know, if we're losing kauri, we're going to lose those associated species, but we're also losing a group of fungi and insects that have evolved to live on kauri itself. Just moving to some of the other values of kauri, it is of course a forest's dream tree. In terms of its characteristics, you have this incredibly high volume of wood per tree, and that's largely because of its trunk dimensions. It has very little taper in the trunk, so that, you know, most trees become thinner as they go towards the top, but kauri, you have this column basically, little taper in the trunk, very cylindrical. You can get a large amount of volume of wood out of any particular bowl. That's why they love it so much. It also has this characteristic of branch shedding. If you've seen kauri trees, not only do the leaves fall off, but the actual branches fall off the main trunk. So you don't have to prune it, which is a wonderful thing. You can just, the trees create a wonderful, if you're a forester, a wonderful log by themselves. Lots of clean wood, no knots in the trunk. And of course, the wood itself has extremely great, good wood quality, excellent strength and workability and finishing properties. Very highly versatile wood. So it's a wonderful tree. As I pointed out, we have depleted it considerably. There was this enormous timber industry in the 1840s to the late 1930s, and really this really kick-started the New Zealand economy over that time. It was the principal building timber in New Zealand until the 1920s. There are a lot of houses still made of kauri. And you mentioned San Francisco, and I know that there are we exported a lot of wood to San Francisco. A lot of the old houses in San Francisco are made of kauri. As I mentioned, there's only 1 to 3% of the old growth forest remaining. And as I pointed out, again, over this area in the north, we're always seeing kauri as an icon, as a symbol of the people and the and society and the area in Northland. It's not only is it an economically and ecologically important species, it has an enormous social impact to the peoples of Northland. I know that myself. I feel a great attachment to it, and I'm very concerned about the potential loss of kauri through PTA. So I think I'm just going to leave this last part and leave it there. I think I'm about out of time. We need some morning tea. So I just want to point out that kauri has these incredible characteristics. I think it's extremely important. Very pleased to see us here talking about how we might keep kauri into the future. Thank you very much.